Welcome back to Foiling Week 2020 and our Gurrit Forum. I don't know, I can't even remember how many we've done today so far. Maybe this is the fourth one, third one. I don't know. But we've been going for a long time this morning and the topics have been fantastic. Once again, from Lago di Garda, we have Bruno Gentoli and Andrew Pindar enjoying their pasta because it's lunchtime over there. And today's topic, or this afternoon's topic, are the growing commercial applications of technologies that we discover, particularly in this case, from the America's Cup and other large design projects. What we learn in our sailing and hydrofoiling projects can have applications elsewhere that can really help improve industries, in a lot of cases, reduce energy, reduce waste, a whole bunch of things. Today we have with us Ian Percy, who should be no stranger not just to the foiling world, but to the sailing world in general. From Artemis Technologies. And
hi, everyone.
Great. It's awesome to have you, Ian. It's really interesting. One of my hopes when we talk about taking these technologies and bringing them to other spaces, because they can be really useful, is seeing if our sailing heroes ever become industry heroes. And I know you'll tell us a little bit about the head of Artemis as well, who helped move this project along. And the other side of this, the first half of this conversation is Ian literally telling us what they've learned at Artemis that they're using for other projects that could be really useful in the world. And then the second half of it is just to talk to Ian personally, because all of us want to know these things, on how we evolve as professionals and individuals. We learn so much from some areas of our life, and then we realize that we want to accomplish other things and make an impact in the world in other ways. And I want to talk to Ian, and we want to talk to Ian about when that shift happened for him. It's already happened. He doesn't do as much sailing and racing anymore, and he's working in much different spaces with the same skills that allowed him to be really successful. Before we get going, just want to, if you're watching online, please send your comments in. Bruno will pass them along to all of us, as long as they're appropriate. And also share everything that we're doing on any of your platforms. We want to see it elsewhere. It helps us spread our message, helps our sponsors. And even Andrew's having really fun watch parties for all of these as well. I'll let Andrew kind of start the conversation off with some ideas. He's sponsored many people who've moved from the sailing space to other organizations and businesses. And what surprises you most, Andrew, when the sailing world reaches out to the rest of the world?
Well, I think it's quite interesting to look at it's an opposite direction to one that I'm used to, because a lot of corporations have chosen sailing to promote their businesses. And
right.
Nearly 40 years ago, I got involved in seeing it as a means to draw an analogy, draw a metaphor between sailing and the industry I was involved with at that time. But I'm fascinated now to see the skill sets that are coming, the science, the engineering, the materials that are being used, that are being replayed back into industry and actually being taken from a leading point of view. And perhaps there's more being created. Is it trickle down or perhaps even trickle up? And I don't know in your case, Ian, whether it's trickle down or trickle up, because you're scaling, from what I'm understanding, perhaps you can talk more about, you're scaling thoughts and ideas that have been developed through the likes of the America's Cup into a commercial environment. And I'm fascinated to see how you as a group of sailors and engineers that are supporting the sailors are doing a reverse application of that.
So the brief background to what we're doing, we're taking ideas from sport. Obviously, my background was America's Cup, but also I think we're quite uniquely placed in the UK with a real Formula One hub. So we're marrying really that on the motor generator unit side, gearbox and mechanical engineering with the hydrofoiling experience from the Cup, and making location-wise it quite unique. But yes, so we are taking, as you say, an idea, a concept, a tested idea concept. Obviously, you're out in front of you there on the lake, or when the wind comes, you're going to have that many prototypes of autonomously controlled hydrofoiling systems going around. displaying incredible efficiencies with the moths and the wasps and alike out there. So yeah, a tried tested concept in terms of hydrofoiling, something that's also been done commercially for many, many years, with technology that's really developed through electrification of automotive, a commercial drive, and that's got a sporting element to it too, with Formula E and Formula One with the KERS unit. So a technology drive from sport, a commercial drive from automotive. And really what we've done as a company is marry that together. And we did so not necessarily because we were trying to marry those things together. The motivation for the venture was to use the technology developed in the America's Cup to decarbonize maritime. So it started with a goal to decarbonize rather than a specific product in mind. But one of the great things that the America's Cup has is as a sporting contest, by its nature, it's very heavily reliant on what we call performance prediction. The reason being that, as we all know, all the sailors know, they change the rules every time, decided by the holder, which means that we get all sorts of weird and wonderful craft over the years, from J class to the current 75. So it really lends our skill set within our sport, I think, or certainly within the America's Cup, really lends itself to more of an inventive optimization from an idea, as opposed to a lot of other sports or industries that have more of an iterative design process. So they've been around, you know, cars have had 4 wheels and they've made iterative improvements in lots of areas. So I think we're quite well placed as an industry to make larger jumps. So yeah, we took, but I was saying that instead of saying we want to make a hydrofoiling electric unit, our goal as a company was to decarbonize maritime. So we used our computational tools to analyze a lot of aspects, from wing sails on ships to hydrofoiling to combinations of the two. Really, where we had seen big gains in performance in the Cup over the last 15 years and seeing where they might be applicable to specific industry use cases. So really most of the work for me and for us was understanding those industry applications, use cases, demand side, because really that defines what you're trying to win. In a sailing race, it's very simple. You're trying to go faster around the course than the other boat. That has some interesting game theory aspects about racing, but ultimately speed is a big driver. So it's about speed. When you're talking about business, it's CapEx versus OpEx. So it's about how much it costs to make something versus how much it can save in efficiency in a product like this, be it a wing sail or. So it's a very different dynamic, and you've got to really be the biggest job of all is understanding what that relationship is, CapEx to OpEx, understand what your derivatives are. If you've done that, then you can go about optimizing, assessing, performance predicting. It was that long process that we went through to develop the products we have now with our e-foiler drives that we're making out of Belfast.
Cool. And so now that's big picture, Ian. Let's get into the weeds just a little bit right away with that end result. And then you can say where some of those technologies got pulled from. But with that e-foiler engine, explain to us where those commercial applications are starting to gel. What that's starting to look like now.
Well, generally, we're targeting the applications where we see that best trade-off between where we can see the opportunity for saving and operating costs being most demanding. You can see on the screen there with ferries, obviously large mileage each day in certain venues have a larger drive towards operational cost savings than, say, a pleasure boat where we go out, for once every month. Of course, there's secondary benefits that are harder to quantify around, the pleasure and the comfortable ride and the coolness factor, etc. But we try and be quite analytical at where we target, and that relationship drives towards markets around offshore renewable transfer vessels, wind farms, fish farms, ferries. the primary markets we're chasing, and they're also some of the most polluting. And I think what's interesting is that 1/3 of worldwide maritime emissions, which is I think we heard after over the last few years, is a really large contributor, bigger than the largest of European countries.
Right.
Is coming from local. So although sure, wing sales and etc. is something we've looked at a lot and worked with others, we're not producing ourselves, worked with others to look at, is important. Local emissions is important globally in terms of CO2, but it's also important because of local pollutions. So we're concentrating on that area at the moment predominantly because we see that's where the largest opportunities to scale are, where the demand will be highest. But yeah, those are the applications in terms of, and actually, interestingly, within those applications, they drive towards slightly different technical solutions depending on those derivatives as they change. So they're not, but at the same time, whenever you're making products, you try and make things as modular as possible. So interesting trade-offs there. That's where the experience and the work and the analytical approach helps. We certainly don't have all the answers. We don't understand all these commercial business applications as much as we need to. We've got to keep working. We've got to keep working with potential customers. We've got to keep working on our technical product. But I think our general approach that we take from sport and from America's Cup particularly is useful.
And I have a question for you on a competitive side of things, because I think not only, because I know you're an engineer and you have all that, you're just really into data all the way from your fin days, analyzing it and making the best use of it. That's what sets you apart. And now you're doing it, professionally in a business application. It's one thing to come up with these ideas. Like we see that ferry, we see the efficiencies to these things. We see the efficiencies to the wing sails. You can probably even come up with a production schedule that would make it the right decision, even just to buy into it. But how hard is it to get the buy-in? I mean, you want to win this thing, right? You want to see these craft being used instead of other craft to reduce, carbon emissions. How hard is it to get the buy-in, and what's the pathway look like to make a whole scale, impact with using these kinds of vehicles?
I mean, it has to pay. It has to pay for, all our business models do not rely on regulatory change to force people to do anything.
Right.
Our primary driver is it has to pay for the end users. The end users
Okay.
being ferry operators or wind farm, asset transfer vessel fleets, etc. BP, Shell, these people who are trying to it has to work for these people on a cost basis and that's really about optimizing for the right parameters, understanding what drives their operational costs. So once you've understood that, you can start to optimize your product to achieve that. And also it takes accepting when your product isn't right. So when you realize that once you've looked at your product in the context of their business versus their current usage, we don't offer savings. Then, of course, you've got to take account financing, and you've got to understand how these higher capex expenditure can be filtered to make use of these overall savings. And I think that has to be considered, and that's when risk comes in, and that's when technical risk comes in. That's when and just the value of money comes in. So, all those factors affect the decision makers of operators. Our job is to try and understand through those operators what they need, what they want, and offer as close to that as is technically possible, and rely on our computational models that we spent 10 years developing. That proprietary information allows us to answer those questions better than anyone else.
Cool.
I've got a
Awesome.
couple of things
Go
to
ahead,
jump
Ian.
in on, Chris, if I may.
Yeah.
The first question, which I think is probably an easy and self-evident answer, but perhaps you could comment on, Ian. It sounds to me as though, had you been continuing to sail on a fin or on a Star or on a Bermuda One design, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now. There wouldn't have been the invention out of that side of sailing to be able to do what you're doing today.
Yeah, I guess, but I would say that all the way through my sailing career, from fins to foiling boats in Bermuda, I took exactly the same approach to solving the technical problems and how they married with the operational and sporting problems. So I wouldn't say that the process would be any different, and if the process is the same, you would hopefully come to the same conclusion. I think what the America's Cup did last time and was spark investment in one particular area, unjustifiably huge investment in one particular area, which makes you understand that problem and those opportunities better. You can't explore the whole world's design space without a lot of budget. The AC rule writers drive you to one certain place that builds an understanding, which sparks ideas. I think that's fair. If we were all sailing Bermuda One designs for our whole lives, then we wouldn't have necessarily had those ideas sparked, because it's not just performance prediction. Of course, you need to have the innovation to check in the computational tools in the first place. And I think the Cup is really great engine for driving that invention. It drives down to funny spaces based on unforeseen implications of rules that were written for different reasons, but it's still hugely fascinating how it drives that innovation.
Yeah. And I'm loving what, by the way, with your Belfast thing. Perhaps you can talk about more about that in a second, because so I'm proud history of Harland and Wolff, the building company there, and Sir Edward Harland was a Scarborough man like myself, so he moved to Belfast, and he trained at the Edinburgh Academy, where my daughter went to university at just graduated as a doctor from there, so I'm proud of that. He then came down to Newcastle, working in the shipping industry, before going to run the shipyard across in Belfast. So tell me more about what's going on in Belfast and how did that connection come about?
Ironically, the very famous shipbuilding history there out of Belfast is very well known, but actually our trigger for going there was more out of aerospace, and our connection is with Shorts Brothers that were based there, who I went on a tour, knowing some of the people that went on a tour of their wing build factory in Belfast and on Belfast Harbour land, which it really was a real eye opener for me, having come from a composite background in terms of what effectively is prototyping in my world, in anyone's world, I would say, in maritime, because the unit volumes are so low. Effectively, they're one-offs. As Percy would know more than anyone, and have huge experience. But that's a different kind of composite manufacture there. It's for large unit volumes, and was a really interesting way to make wings. And so they make carbon composite wings for the air, and we needed someone to be able to volume produce cheap wings for the water.
So did he confirm it? Did he say Shorts?
Yeah, so Bombardier, which is Shorts, and originally Shorts.
That's the flying boats, wasn't it? They create Shorts, the Short Sutherland, and so on, those flying boats. Exactly.
So it's a really nice full circle in branding there. They actually left the water, of course. Our one stays connected, hopefully. But yeah, so they and also within the region there in Belfast, they built quite a cluster up around this composite wing building at cost, and so that was the initial spark to be with there. There's also in Belfast Harbour Commission quite a unique setup where the harbour owns half of Belfast. Maritime is such a heart there, and that allows they have a lot of clout within the city, and they also have a lot of influence, obviously, over their port. It's their port, so the operations, the testing offers a real opportunity, and also two world-class universities there. So it felt a lot of natural reasons, but I have to say the first spark was from aerospace, ironically, rather than from maritime.
Right. Well, my late father-in-law went to Queen's Belfast, so another bit of a connection there.
Oh,
cool.
And that's fantastic. And I didn't think about I guess I should have thought about the university connection. I should have also thought about the fact that the port is a wonderful testing bed to just figure it out and compare. I have two questions, a two-part question for you, Ian. First of all, how close is, the multi-part solution for like a zero emissions transport, right? Not just creating the actual item, but also making it, like you said, fit the use and the budget for the actual end user or the end user company. How close are you to that entire equation being solved? And then the second question is, what other new projects are you starting to work on that you can share with us?
No, that's a really good point, because you realize what a small part in the chain you are. You're producing, and you realize that particularly when you join, we find ourselves joining other projects where the battery or hydrogen-based maritime solution is part of a much bigger project that someone might be putting together around, an island's hydrogen economy, shall we say, and right. They're trying to transfer, but the whole of the islands, it's a big project than the one boat that's feeding that island, but you fit into it. And it's the same with, for example, dealing with Ireland has one of the largest challenges in the world with grid, high frequency changes in grid supply. So we're talking about wind blowing real hard, like it does there a lot in the middle of the night, and no one wanting any electricity. So they have issues of oversupply as much as they do of over demand. But the two become the same, of course, because if you, at the moment, we solved our grid issues by just having more and more supply. So we just spend more and more money on infrastructure. We build more and more wind farms. But actually, we end up having far more capacity than we need to cover those moments. So, and in the past, these peaks have been dealt with by just turning power stations on and off. Well, unfortunately, we can't really do that with the wind.
Right.
But of course, but us as a large battery banked vessel, with when we're talking about sizes of 4 megawatts, you're really making a big difference. So you fit into much bigger picture as a way to deal with the challenges of switching to renewable energy supply within countries. And then you get into the trading of high frequency electricity. That becomes a real, that's an interesting challenge that certainly our boats are in no way solving, but it's part of a bigger picture. And it's really interesting as you realize how it all fits and becomes connected. Equally with transportation, with people transportation, obviously it doesn't work to have a electric foiling or hydrogen foiling ferry dropping someone into a city centre if they then can't connect. And so one of the big parts of our Belfast Maritime Consortium is not just the producing the technology, it's much equally challenging is fitting that technology in as part of a multimodal transport network, and using Belfast as an example of that. Those who've ever come in from Bangor or Carrickfergus, sat in traffic, like many cities around the world, they often get pinched on road or rail networks. Trying to release that, but also trying to encourage the public to walk more and cycle more and make ourselves more active. And so it fits into a much wider problem of an aging society, of congestion. And you're part of, you're never, you can never think you're doing slam dunks. You're just part of a much bigger picture. And that's really interesting to me. I like that. I like meeting these people who are passionate about multimodal city, passionate about, grid frequency challenges. That's one of the joys I've had of this new venture for me, is learning about other people's challenges, which are equally interesting and challenges most of us have never thought of.
Right.
I'm trying to think, Ian, when you were sailing with Artemis, and obviously with a big Swedish connection, did you do anything much with the Stena company up there?
Am I muted? Yeah, I'm friendly with Dan and Carl Johan and the guys. So and they actually have a big presence in Belfast as well. So yeah, I think they're doing a lot of stuff as well as a company. I mean, then they obviously are the focus of where we saw the most impact we could make is in people transportation without cars. So we, hence we're talking on Foiling Week, in the foiling world, where we could see the largest positive impact for customers in that field of reducing operating costs for a given upfront capex cost. So Stena aren't really in that world today. Obviously, they're doing longer trips with cars and boats. But I've had many a conversation with Dan and Carl Johan about that future of where they want to go as a company as private car ownership goes away, and as we connect between hubs of transportation, walking, car share, buses, etc. So yeah, I think for a company like Stena, they're always looking not only to the future for their own company, but I know that they look to the future from a social responsibility standpoint, particularly being up in the Baltic there. You really, I think with such shallow water, you really feel the impact you have on the environment.
Yeah. Well, one of the sailors here, you're bound to know Rasmus Bergstrom. So Rasmus, who's Stena, got a senior position. He was just here with his moth and his sons here with moth. And he's part of a Stena initiative to do with reclaiming batteries for end-of-life vehicles, and I think particularly with Volvo trackside and Volvo cars. And it's great to see where the pioneering that's been taking place in sailing programs, including when Volvo were even more involved in the ocean race. You then seeing these thought processes actually trickling through into industry.
Yeah, I think with the battery and second life battery is a really interesting element to us too. It's whenever you have a vehicle that has regular stops and entries, you're always trading off battery capacity on board the boat that comes with an efficiency cost against speed of recharge. And that's where if you're talking the second life batteries comes into play there, because you aren't so worried about battery power density when it's sitting on dry land. You're much more worried about it when it's sitting in a car or a boat.
One of the sponsors here is of the event, and it's on the screen behind us, of course, is Torqeedo. And yesterday I went out on the Torqeedo rib, and I've had a stink boat for 40 years. Water skiing off Scarborough, I know how to go up and hill and down Dale. But I was cynical about the prospect of going out with an electric engine. I thought it was something you put on a Bass Pro boat. But yesterday I was out for 2 hours. I was driving this thing, and it had all the power I could possibly want, and it was silent. And I felt an awful lot better coming back instead of just pouring fuel out through that thing. So it's again, but people like Torqeedo, are you in that, crossing over into that space, or are you in working in sort of parallel?
We work a little bit with Torqeedo on the battery side, on the smallest product that we have in our range. We're not really competing with Torqeedo. Generally, our boats are for commercial applications and larger, and that comes with a different technical solution. As I said, it's a different relationship between operating costs and capital expenditure that really suits the hydrofoiling technology. The hydrofoiling technology comes, as we know, anyone who has bought a moth knows, comes with costs and complexity that brings it away from being a mass consumer product in the way Torqeedo is aiming to be. So we target a slightly different concept, taking our unique skill set around the ability to control different vessels in different sea states in a very cost-effective way through simulation and through the modeling we build up. So our USP is different. It's a similar space. We collaborate with them on a couple of projects, and I totally echo what you're saying. And I had a similar experience when I saw a beautiful small ketch out sailing, and there wasn't much wind, and they were going along at about 8 knots. And I thought that's pretty impressive. And then tucked out the back was this silent Torqeedo engine with a nice optimized large prop driving it along. And I think that's it really is the future. And I think for sailing boats, and certainly I had things of I dream of, and it's not necessarily where our business is going, but I know people like Torqeedo, and I dream of this ability to have sailing combined with electric propulsion in a joined up way. And I think that's it. All the technology is there to do it. It needs it needs some. It's never going to be that cost effective at first, but it has some, and which is why we're not doing it now commercially. But I think it's a really interesting challenge, and the software solutions are there, the hardware solutions are there to have regen and propulsion working. And yeah, it's going to be great. I think we need some enthusiastic super yacht owners to look at the next generation of boat. They're not necessarily coming at it as keen sailors, but they're coming at it people who don't want to. They want to be able to have unlimited range. They want to use their super yacht. And I saw VPLP came out with a vision for something recently, which is great. That kind of, we did so a couple of years ago in a similar way with the what we call the autonomous sailing vessel. I think these are the visions that the technology is there. It just, it's never going to be a mass demand product, but it's something that if you were a billionaire from the 21st century, that's where I would encourage them to go.
Well, we have a couple more minutes left, Ian, and just to dovetail what you were saying, maybe a year or two ago at Foiling Week, Paul Larson, who we spoke about earlier, best known for Sail Rocket, among other things, and the 50 knot barrier, he was talking about like a transatlantic proa, passenger cargo energy farming, farming energy when you're sailing and using energy when you're not sailing.
Yeah, exactly. Very similar.
Yeah, and it's so exciting to think about those applications because it does so many good things besides the fact that it's just cool. And so my last kind of question for you, Ian, and if people want to learn more about Artemis Technologies, there's an awful lot on your website about it, and is all of us putting ourselves in a world much bigger than ourselves. It was easy in our sailing careers and our competitive sailing careers, if you were doing that, to just be in this really tight little universe, right? And even just the fan base wasn't as big until you got to the Olympics. But tell me about that shift that you and I talked about before we started, from being so driven to succeed in one specific area to now where you recognize how small you are, but how excited you are to be this small piece of a much bigger intermodal transportation and other issues. When did you make that shift, either first in your mind or just professionally from your professional sailing career to this? Like, was it just a slow creeping thing, or did you wake up one day and say, I need to be a part of the world in a different way?
Well, I think it's all the way through my career. I was incredibly passionate about what I was trying to achieve, and the team that I worked with and myself really enjoyed our time, be that Artemis or Stars or Fins. We really enjoyed our time working on something, but I don't think I ever thought it was that big a deal in terms of the world. It was a big deal to me. I'm not going to deny it, and all my competitors. I'm not saying I wasn't giving it all I ever could, but I was not one of these people who thought that the result of a sailing race was going to affect that many people's lives worldwide. Right. Nor was my goal particularly to affect people worldwide. But what I mean is, it wasn't hard for me to transfer what I enjoy and what I got out of working with teams and being passionate about achieving goals, optimizing and realizing that you've made correct decisions, to apply it to something else, because the thing itself was never that big a deal to me. I mean, I enjoy sailing and I enjoyed the process myself, but I'm not someone who thinks that, we're not football in terms of football does affect people's lives. There are.
Well, don't sell yourself too short. A lot of people are inspired by you.
But don't get me wrong. I mean, I love this sport and I love it for myself, and I really enjoyed the process. But for me to make that switch to doing, getting that same pleasure out of doing something else was not too hard.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And, I think about Ellen MacArthur, who a lot of people in our audience and beyond even now know. I look at someone like her and I look at someone like yourself, and I almost think that the first stage of your sailing career was like a waiting room or a prep room for what you're really supposed to be doing with your life, like what the world wants you to be doing.
Well, Ellen's an inspiration in what she's achieved through her work in cancer, and I certainly haven't achieved 100th of that in my next goal. But Yeah, I think Ellen very much, it's the same as me, very much enjoyed her sailing, but it wasn't for the sailing itself for her, clearly, and she's managed to use her sailing skill, gave her notoriety and fame, and she's used that to make tremendous positive impact. And whereas myself, I guess it's probably less altruistic. I got a lot of pleasure myself out of working in teams, solving problems, and I've managed to find a way to transfer that into another field. And for sure, the motivation being environmental and trying to make some difference to the big global challenge we have, but at the same time, not pretending that there isn't a selfish element. That I really enjoy working with technical and commercial people to try and solve problems and get a lot of pleasure out of that.
Awesome. Andrew and Bruno, this has been a fantastic conversation. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
One, maybe a short one. I will put a little video while I ask it. A couple of years ago, we saw a video on the Amazon River with the Artemis. And I would like to quickly explain the technical principle behind. We know fundamentally it's doable, but I remember another video of you explaining the fundamentals of car sailing. So can you tell us about it, and also if you are planning to actually listen, how far are you this goal?
I mean, the motivation of the video was really to try and bring home how much efficiency had been driven into marine craft from the America's Cup and from MOFs and from foiling in general and wing sail. So, really this was just a statement about this AC45 or AC50's VMG downwind was 3 times the wind speed going. So almost by its nature, if the wind is purely generated by the water movement rather than the wind, you can go back against that water movement. In truth, it's not kind of how it always works, because as we know, with wind shear, the wind gets stuck to the water as it goes close. This would be the other way around. The water would get stuck, the wind would get stuck to the water, so actually it wouldn't be moving very fast. It'd be stopped with the water. But I don't let the truth spoil a good story when maybe if you had a very tall mast, you could get into the real wind above and it would still work. But, I think that the point there was that it's, it's actually quite a mind bender to when you ever get over 1-to-1 on VMG against wind speed, because you are, to some people, it's some perpetual motion thing when you get to that point, because like a MOF's clearly doing, 2.5 now in maybe more in certain wind conditions downwind. So, these really, and wind kite, foiling wind kites even more so, so really impressive speeds against wind speed. So you kind of feel like even if the wind was blowing you in one direction, you could go back the other way at 3 times the speed. That gets people's mind going a little bit.
Yeah.
But am I going to the Amazon? No, I don't want to. I'm not sure I'll be going to the Amazon anytime soon. You might have to give us
Okay, thanks for the explanation.
Great, Ian, and awesome, Bruno, to remind us of that. I mean, it's just to get open your minds up a little bit and get the concepts clear in your head, what's possible. And if you didn't, it's almost like, if you don't swing for the fences, you won't even get close, right?
Exactly. Team New Zealand taught us that for the last 10 years. Eh? They've done well. Given I saw you had Dan on earlier, so I thought it'd be worth giving credit to them for that kind of visionary thinking and over really, I guess a lot of people there, they're foiling weak with their MOF sailors would claim they were there first, but we have to, you have to take your hat off to that team, which is a tight, innovative team working together and able to invent and create better than most.
Right, and that's what, not just technology, but that's what sports teaching us. That's why sailing and hydrofoiling together really has opened up our minds. Almost anything is possible in our minds, problems to be solved.
Whenever you have unjustifiable levels of investment in something, you come up with quite good
and thank God we have it,
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you, Torben.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everyone, thank you so much. This has been really fantastic. If you're watching online, please share this. If you weren't at Andrew's watch party, if you were, I hope you invited people to it. Ian, thank you so much. Are you getting out on the water yourself? What are you doing these days?
I went out on a little chug the other week, but no, not that much. I was due to be sailing a bit this season, and that's actually one thing I really miss. You know, not doing as much of it, you realise how much you love sailing and how much you miss it. So for me, it's been a real shame that so many events have been cancelled this year, because I would have enjoyed nothing more than 5-10 weeks of, racing with friends. Next year, I'm hoping this craziness goes and we can get back out.
Okay, cool. Well, it's good to know that you're still sailing, or at least will be when we're all sailing again.
Absolutely.
So, let's see, Bruno, Andrew, thanks so much, guys. What is next? Hugh,
Chris, we've got to ask Ian before he goes. Excuse me, I listened to you the other week on certainly on probably Barker Ozzy and certainly on Shirley's podcast, which were great, Ian. But come on, now you're seeing all the boats turning up into New Zealand, and you're an independent view. You might have a favourite because of your friendship with Ben, but come on, who's going to win the cup?
Well, I haven't really seen Ben's latest boat, but obviously, yeah, he's been a really good friend of mine for many, many years, and we've raced together for many years. So, on a personal level, I really hope they can win. But yeah, I think it's going to be, for the reasons I said about Team New Zealand, they've set the standard about being innovative, tight, getting that balance right as the challenge grows. I think one of the interesting things this cup is, by the rule that they wrote, is a bigger challenge. It's more expensive, and I guess the question mark is, can Dan and his team and the sailing team expand from in the last cup, which really suited that incredibly tight team that they had between Dan and Glenn and Ray and Pete and those guys. Can that expand to what is a more complex challenge? I mean, I haven't been in it enough. I'm sure they have thought about this far more than me, and they're all very smart and flexible people. So I'm sure they've adjusted their structure. So I think, unfortunately, whenever a challenge gets bigger, gets more complex, the tight times get them. Yes, a little bit funding helps, but most of all, smooth running, understanding each other, tight teams that can make decisions pay. That pays the teams that have been around for 25 years, constantly improving. And so that's my answer.
Thank you.
Awesome. I hadn't thought about the scaling of the team. You're right about that. That's interesting. A much bigger team.
Yeah, more variables, more bigger design space. Maybe now needs more layers of management, more structure. Something that Team New Zealand from the outside have always benefited from not being laboured with. Something we at Artemis tried to embrace, but if we had taken on this America's Cup, we would have had to have evolved. I'm sure Team New Zealand were ahead of the curve once again on that one.
Yeah, maybe some more diversity in the teams too.
Yeah,
gender and other would help.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic, but one I totally concur with.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. Great, guys. Thank you so much. We're going to be talking about DSS type foils, sideway foils with a new project with Hugh Wellborn next. Ian, thanks again, man. Can't wait to see you making impacts with Artemis Technologies. Bruno, Andrew, we'll see you next. And thanks everyone for watching, and please share.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Ciao.